Well, Pastor Staszek, I am so honored to have you as a guest today um, on the podcast. I'm really uh, excited to talk with you. Obviously, we've heard um, from a number of Ukrainians and heard their story of how um, they escaped and just unimaginable things a person like myself here in Dallas, Texas will probably never see.
Yeah.
um, and you are seeing the the outcome of that there where you're at in Poland. As I know you are trying to help and serve as many of the guests as you can possibly serve, and that's a big order. So, but before we dive into any of that, why don't you tell me just a little bit about yourself? How did you get in ministry, and how did you end up in doing a church plant there in Poland?
I was a college student from a Catholic background
Yeah.
when I ran into some people who turned out to be students, circled around some Campus Crusade missionaries working in Poland in those days. And it's through this group of people who really stood out in the crowd, in a sense, that I realized that they were having something that I always wanted to have, but did not have, and that was um, this ability to approach God as a friend and someone you can really love rather than fear and run away from or try to manipulate. So because of the gospel that they have presented, which when Paul says that the gospel is the power of God for salvation to anyone who believes, it did turn out to be so for me. Certainly, when I understood the gospel and the kind of God it presented, it changed my approach to God because this God was worthy of love in response to his own love, unconditional love. So this was something I never knew before, and I knew it was going to change my life, and it did. It happened in the summer between my second and third year of university on a summer camp that they organized. But since then, I basically desired to do something to help others to learn the same thing that I have learned, which so much impacted me. And so I got involved in crew as a student. I mean, I'm saying crew because that's how they call themselves in the U.S. now, but they actually
Right.
have a different name in different countries. And they used to, call themselves Campus Crusade for Christ.
Right.
uh,
Growing up, that's how I knew them as. I knew them as
yeah,
Campus Crusade for
yeah.
Christ, and they obviously had a major global impact in
The
leading
name
young
in
people.
Poland was always different, and it used to be something that you could translate New Life Movement.
Okay.
But now it's basically called Christian Movement MT28, which basically refers to the Gospel of Matthew,
Matthew 28.
chapter 28, and Jesus
Right.
sending his disciples into the world to make disciples of the nations. So this is, Campus Crusade or Crew today has been a big, big part of my life for years. I became a believer uh, 32 years ago through them, and I stayed involved with crew since then. First 3 years just as a student, and then I joined when I graduated and get married with a lady that was on staff with crew for 6 years already. We started together to serve through this particular mission organization, and it happens to this day. Now, Crew is not necessarily known for planting churches that much. Its primary goal was campus ministry and college
Right.
students. But about 10 years ago, I think here in Eastern Europe, we began to shift a little bit more towards the working with church planting, and it coincided in a sense with my own seminary education. I went to Dallas Theological Seminary for my THM, and when I came from there, I began to look at church a little differently. I would say my picture became much more broad and complex than it was while I was with Crew, which is a parachurch organization. So
Yeah.
it was on my heart to to contribute something to the growth of the local church as such. But with my traveling schedule and things like that, it's hard to commit because starting a church it's a commitment,
Right, right.
So it took some years, but eventually, I and my wife and her sister and her brother, who also are crew missionaries here in Poland, we decided that we needed to begin to form a group here where we live in the suburbs of Warsaw, where there is no evangelical church, and we just started to meet at home as two families and pray, and and over time some other people were joining us. So we are still a very small group. There is about 20 adult people and some children, and we basically meet at our house or our neighbor's house or somebody else's house if we can't do that. It's a house church, at least at this point. We are affiliated with the Polish Baptist Church for
Okay.
legal matters, but our form is very very non-typical, I'd say, and
Or it's very typical. You went Paul style. You went Acts style church, meeting in homes and small groups and sharing. So maybe
so
you're running those typical church since the beginning of time.
yeah, so we kind
So
of back all the way back. We went all the way back to the to the times of the apostles and how the church looked then. I'm not saying that this is the only way it should, but it was something that we were longing for, like deep relationships and really creating a family of people that come together to build up each other and share life. So this is our desire for this church to be, and it happens to be this. And so there is not too many of us, but we really know each other well, and we get involved in a lot of things together. We have very good relationships with the Watermark Church in Dallas,
okay.
from where we have, I would say, imported their huge and wonderful ministry that they call Regeneration.
Hmm.
Uh, and we also recently started Reengage, which is a ministry for couples. So we are learning from the big ones, but
Nice.
when we find something that is really responding to the specific real need of the people that people have here, we try to use it as a way to serve people, both the believers and unbelievers, and also as a vehicle for the gospel to go to the people. Because frankly, when I compare between now and 30 years ago, when I became a believer, the world has changed here
It
around
has.
us.
Yeah.
It's mm, being religious. It's not in fashion anymore.
Right.
It's it's only when people see that what you believe really make a true impact on your life that they begin to be more open to actually even listen to what you want to say. Other than that, they will just look at you very weird and they just go their way. And it is, it is true. And I think it was always true in history, but it is very true that mostly those who are suffering for some reason, for one or another, that their attention turns to God, and then
Right.
God opens the window for them to be really, getting to know Him and the gospel. So that's why our ministry as a small church, it's really directed to the people's needs. And I
Hmm.
think this is partly why we, when this crisis with the Ukrainian refugees came up, that it was very obvious for us that we need to be in it too, because these are real people who have real needs, and they
Hmm.
suffer, and they need help. And if we are true believers and we want to really extend God's love to other people, where is the better occasion or opportunity than here now, with all these people who are away from their home with their children, sometimes leaving their homes with just a plastic bag in their hands,
Right.
and staying away, and wondering whether they will be ever able to go back. So
Now that's interesting. Let's expand on that just for a second here. So obviously in Poland, um, and of course what I'm hearing is from our media here in the United States. Poland has been phenomenal in taking in many refugees, almost to the pain points of Poland. You're running out of supplies yourselves there, because you're bringing in so many people are crossing the border. When did you, as you guys were watching this conflict build up, right, I believe the war started on the 24th of February.
Yes.
Right, those weeks leading up, when did you guys realize from another country, this isn't looking good? Like something's going to happen here. This isn't just a typical Putin saber rattling. This is serious.
So honestly, to the last day, I could not believe he will do it. I was
Mm,
observing very closely what was happening. I knew that the US intelligence was really alarming, that something really bad is going to happen, but nobody really wanted to believe that here.
right.
And it seemed to me too absurd,
Mm,
too evil, too stupid on Putin's side to really go out and do it and send his troops and kill people. He was, in many ways, he was having his way while just bullying Ukraine and trying to build up this military presence. So I did not believe it. On February 24th, I woke up, I opened my computer, and everything there was in red. Every page
mm,
I opened up was in red, telling the war began. The invasion started, and there was a picture from Google Maps showing all these different places where they shoot their rocket missiles and bombarded.
right.
And there was an information coming from our own government that with what is happening, they expect a huge influx of refugees coming because this is a very serious thing. Nobody really expected that, so yeah, I was surprised. I was really surprised and horrified. And on that day, I wrote. I keep sending email updates on our ministry to our supporters. And on that
Right.
on that day, I wrote an email or an update that I titled "From Fear to Reality:
Mm.
the Russian invasion of Ukraine," because it no longer was a fear; it became a reality, and a very surprising one for us.
What was the feeling for most people in Poland? Were they kind of in the same boat? Did they, not believe it was going to happen? And, everyone kind of had that same thought. What's interesting to me, really quick, to side note here, when I was talking to some of the folks I was talking to yesterday, they said the same thing. They said that they didn't believe that it would happen. I mean, they saw it, they saw the buildup happening. They really didn't until the very last minute believe that there would be an attack. And then of course when that attack happened, a lot of them had thought through some general ideas. Well, this is where we're going to go. This is where we're going to not go. But then when it became, as you just said, when fear became reality, they were in a position where they had to really scramble and try to get out before the danger was.
My impression is that even our own government, who knew the intelligence, because I know that the U.S. shared with their allies what was going to happen, they also looked surprised
Hmm,
to me, and everybody was, except
right,
maybe one of my good friends. He is a customs officer who was working on the border between Moldova and Ukraine, helping as a European Union mission to help them, run the border. And he told me that when it started, they got a call that they need to leave immediately, going to Moldova. And while they were going to Moldova in the morning, there were already trucks coming from Moldova to Ukraine with the humanitarian help, which
hmm,
means that some governments actually did believe things will happen and they were getting ready for it. But most of the people that I know, they all simply thought, well, this is not the first time that Putin is, rattling his saber and trying to intimidate people. He was doing this for so long. This is just one more case of this, and it turned
right.
out it was not.
Let me ask. So we've talked about the people. We've talked about the government. Let's talk about the church for a second. So, what obviously, as you mentioned earlier, God moves in miraculous ways, even in time of trauma and drama and What have you seen from the response, whether it's there in Poland or Moldova or Romania, really just Eastern Europe in general? What response have you seen from the local church? Do you feel like they are stepping up and taking advantage of this opportunity to share the gospel? What are your
I
thoughts on how
was,
the church is doing?
I was, I probably shouldn't be, but I was surprised and I was amazed with how people responded. Within just hours of what happened, it was hard for me to figure out a person that I knew that was not somehow involved.
Hmm.
Everybody was getting together, knowing that these things are coming now when the war started, and it's both our crew ministry that began to talk with the Ukrainian crew ministry to provide secure place for them if they need it, or the churches. I called my brother who is a bivocational pastor west in the western part of Poland, and they already were organizing place for people to come to help them. I called my other brother who lives nearby, and he was already, contacting some folks, telling them there is a place that they could come. This was amazing, and it was.
Hmm.
There were three things that really amazed me at the beginning of this whole war. One was how the people here responded, and especially the church, evangelical church. Evangelical churches here are not big. We are a
Right.
small minority in our country. It's a predominantly Roman Catholic culture, uh, but they really got involved, and I could hear about it from all directions. Just recently, my brother-in-law went to help carry some sensitive load to the border of Ukraine, and he stopped in a church there, a small Baptist church. And when he talked with, it's closer to the border, so they have more contact. They, uh, they have registered everybody that went through their church, and there was over 4,000 Ukrainian
Wow.
people that stayed somehow connected with their church. Either staying or going further or being equipped, and that was something I was really very surprised. The other thing is, I didn't mention that before, but on 24th the war started, and I and my wife had a trip scheduled on the 25th to the United States because
Hmm.
our daughter lives in the U.S. She studied in Lynchburg, Virginia, and she's graduated, and she was moving to Texas, and
Yeah.
to where our friends live. And so we promised her that we will come over to help her move, and we already had tickets and everything. So we actually did go, and we tried to shorten our stay to the necessary minimum to be back as soon as we can. But I was still meeting some people in the U.S. at that time, and I was also very impressed by how they responded, how big
Yep.
interest was in was happening, and how many people were asking how they can help. And many were looking for a reliable partnership to be established with someone. They couldn't go themselves, but they wanted to help financially. They were praying, they were asking how things are going. And I was really um, under great impression of how evangelical churches in the United States really were concerned about this, and how they took action to help. We have actually received, some extra donations from many sources that were specifically addressed to this particular crisis, because people wanted to help. They couldn't
Right.
go, they couldn't be here. Sometimes it wouldn't be even very helpful if they did, because of
Right.
all the mess that is created. But
Right.
there's a lot of things that people need, and as you mentioned, we welcomed these folks. But Poland isn't a very rich country either, so
Right.
so the resources are limited, and so this response that I observed was really something that really touched my heart, and I really was very impressed with the heart that people have to help in this great crisis that ensued.
You
So
know, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that surprised me being here in Texas, um, and talking day in and day out with our pastors and our partners, there in Eastern Europe, uh, seeing so many nonprofits, and it's kind of weird because one would think if you're a nonprofit organization, you naturally work together. But one thing I've noticed, I work with a lot of nonprofits here in the United States. That's my everyday job is I consult with nonprofit organizations and help them grow and develop and all that good stuff. And they typically silo their resources a lot of times. They don't really work together all that well. They, well, we got our thing going here, you got your thing going over there. It blew me away to see all of these nonprofits come together and so quickly without any agenda, without any sort of, you do this for me, I'll do this for you kind of thing. It was just, we just got to serve. And like you said, to see the church's response here, I go to a large church. We go to Fellowship Church here in Dallas, and to see the immediate response that we started doing, working with Convoy of Hope and some of the other ministries that are working over there. It truly. I guess the best way to say it is I regained faith in humanity a little when I saw the fact that all of these people said, like you said, well, we can't go, but what can we do? Talking to Sophie yesterday, she was saying, just to be able to go and get a cup of coffee with your friends. It's like, I can't do that right now because my friends are all over the place. Just to have a dessert. It's like, just to sit down and have dessert with my friends, and I think that I'm excited for her story to be shared because I think a lot of times people think, well, I don't have a lot to give. I just have a little to give. Well, here's this young woman asking for a cup of coffee, asking for a dessert, because that brings a sense of, a sense of reality, just a moment of calm, something that's familiar. And so that's one of the things that I've been blown away by.
So when you were talking about this, it just came to my mind, how when we are walking with God, when we look at the world through His eyes, you just cannot stay without responding to it. And even, maybe I will have a chance to tell it a little more later, but there are these two ladies staying in our house. And they both have, two kids. Their husbands are back there in Ukraine, and so we take care of them. One of them is a hairdresser. So we will bring people to her to do a haircut, and she gets a little money from that. And she also wants to give her part of her income that she is making to help. And so
Wow.
she came and bring this little that she has been earning while staying with us because she wants to contribute. And when we were putting together an event for the Ukrainian children at the local school, the local school opened, I think, 3 classes for Ukrainian children to learn Polish, to be able to, move around better here. All they do is really learn Polish language at first. I mean, they can't do anything more. So these ladies that are with us, they sent their kids there too, and they helped us to go to the school and invite everybody from the school for the Easter egg hunt on the Good Saturday, and we had like 70 kids, running
That's
around
awesome.
in our yards, and we thought, well, this is just something fun for these kids who are away from their families. But we also got, Polish Ukrainian Bible for children, and Josh McDowell's More Than Carpenter
Marvin Carpenter,
translated
yeah.
into Ukrainian, and we were able to give them all these, just to also, respond to their spiritual needs. But in the end, when we finished that and we were kind of talking about what happened, this lady, her name is Zhenya, she said that she was so happy that she could contribute something to this. She's away, she can't do things that she normally does at her church, but she was here with us, and she was very useful to. And she was actually the one who presented the gospel when all the children got together. We didn't speak Ukrainian, they didn't speak Polish, so Zhenya, stood up and she was presenting the gospel for all these kids, and she felt so happy that she could contribute to this whole situation, being herself in need for help from others. So this is beautiful.
Yeah, it's incredibly beautiful. I know that we've heard a couple of stories with some of our other partners, same thing. When you're trying to feed, several hundred people at one time, it takes a lot of hands to prepare that food. And so a lot of the guests hop right in. How can I serve? How can I help? I don't want to put this all on you and your staff. What can we do? I know that we have a pastor outside of Bucharest. You may know Pastor George, who's building a camp.
I haven't met him personally, but I heard a lot about him, a lot good from my other friend. Yes,
Oh, from Richard?
from Richard. Yes.
Yeah. He is awesome, and so he ended up with a really interesting situation. He took in a number of Nigerian medical students who were actually studying in the Ukraine, and now they're helping him build his camp for special needs children there in Bucharest. So it's just amazing how God orchestrates these kind of cosmic, like these amazing things that only God could do, and to see and hear these stories. And are there any other stories that kind of stick out in your mind of people that you've met or who have come through your home or through your church?
At a certain point, when we already came back from the States and we began to bring more people into our house, there was a family from southern part of Ukraine that came to us, and the route that they did was they first went to Moldova, and they couldn't leave there for a while. Part of it was the vaccination issues,
Mm.
and then from somebody told them from Budapest, they went to Bucharest, and from Bucharest they flew to Warsaw, hoping that they will be able to move forward because they have family in South Carolina or North Carolina.
Okay.
But they got stuck in Warsaw at the airport, and they didn't have a way to go anywhere. So some friends, through friends of friends, they finally got to us, and we invited them, and they stayed with us, and they were really devastated with all these obstacles that they were having on the way. But it turned out he was a retired pastor, so.
Oh, wow.
He stayed with us here for a while, and after a few days, because there were other Ukrainians that we really couldn't communicate well with. I mean, we don't speak Ukrainian, they don't speak Polish. It's very hard to communicate,
Right.
and he began to be our arm of the spiritual care for those people who were with us. And as a retired pastor, he knew how to
Mm.
talk with them. He knew the language. When we got together on in church on Sunday, he would have a separate sermon or a conversation for all these Ukrainians that were with us. And few days after, basically, he was suddenly not depressed or angry. He was shining, for how
Wow.
God was able to use him, and for us it was a huge help. We took him to help him, but he was helping us to help these other people that we couldn't really minister spiritually too well because of the language barrier.
Right.
And he stayed with us for an, a little over a week, and then suddenly they found a way for him to move forward. So we bought him tickets to Germany, and he stayed there for a few days, and from there he finally got to his family in North Carolina, and he sent some picture, happy that he was there. So it took
Oh,
him about a
nice.
month. From the time he left his home to getting to his family in the U.S., going around different places in Europe, and one of the things God had for him was to be help for us and others in spiritually serving those who were in need during that time. And some of these people were really asking difficult questions. They because of all the suffering, and
Oh,
so
I'm sure.
having him being able to communicate, it was just wonderful. He was like a gift from heaven for us to help others, and it helped him to to understand why God kept stopping him and not let him go that
Right.
fast as he was hoping to.
God
So,
had a plan there. God knew what he was doing.
oh
So he knew that
yeah.
for such a time as this, I need you here. You got some ministry to do. Do pastors actually retire? I didn't think pastors retired. I thought you guys worked pastoring till the
Well,
day you leave the earth, till you make it to the pearly gates. So,
Well,
um,
so at least functionally, he still did his work, for the opportunity that came for him.
absolutely. Well, I'd like to first of all, thank you so much again for spending this amount of time with me this morning, and just sharing from your perspective. It's so refreshing to see the hand of God, the providence of God, in such a tragic time, and to know that God is still on the throne. And I can understand how someone who's not a believer. Who doesn't have that relationship, this can be very challenging. This can make you ask a lot of faith questions really quickly. Those of us who are believers, it's just a constant reminder that, God is on the throne and he's going to do miracles.
I tell you, sometimes even us who are believers have a really hard time. Another story that it's not personally with me related, but my brother-in-law, he was in touch with a missionary. He was with a Christian missionary in Ukraine
Mhm.
who was drafted to the Ukrainian army, and he was
Oh, wow.
sent to the Donbas area where very heavy
Mm.
fights are taking place,
Right.
and he was put in charge of a platoon of men, and they got in such a fire there that half of the platoon was killed and the other half was wounded. There was no healthy man left in that group, and he himself being in charge of these people, he was devastated, and he still is. I mean, it is a very hard thing
Mm.
that can happen, and even for the believer to find himself in that situation of such tragedy and trauma can
Yeah.
be very difficult. And I think we need to remember that and pray for those who are believers there as they experience all these traumatic situations, that their faith is being attacked severely by what is happening.
Absolutely. Well, kind of in closing, one thing I'd like for you to take a moment and do um, is, would you mind? I'm gonna be quiet here for a second, and would you mind just talking to the pastors here in the United States? And really, what I love is, how can we as a congregation thousands of miles away from Ukraine, from Poland, from Eastern Europe, how can we make a difference? What would you tell a pastor if said, how can we help? What would you tell that pastor?
Well, first of all, I would like to ask everyone that can to stand in prayer for all of those who are here, either involved in helping or the refugees or those who stayed or relocated in Ukraine. They are undergoing a terrible time and they need our support and our prayer. And I think also another way that a very tangible help can be given is sharing basically some of the wealth that is in the U.S. comparing with Ukraine or countries like Romania, Moldova, and Poland. I think that I was really amazed how also unbelievers began to help, but I also see how they are getting tired, and there is coming a time that only those who are motivated internally and faithful that they will stay helping, and
Right.
and those needs will not go away quickly. The war is still on, and the suffering is tremendous, and there is so much to rebuild and recover for these people. So, in my estimation, there will be a lot of needs in encouraging people and helping them financially or physically or humanitarily. And I think it's the believers who have the best position because of their faithfulness and understanding what true love and persistent love is. And so I wanted to encourage you, pray with your people for us, for those Ukrainians, and just remind them that when the things go out of the media outlets, they are no longer on front pages. These people are still there, and they still need our support and our help. And we want to be there, and and you can join us with that. Because the need is tremendous and it will be for a long time.
That's perfect, Pastor. Well, I again thank you and to your entire congregation and to your brother's congregation. and really all of the evangelical churches and folks there in Poland who I know are making massive sacrifices to be able to help their neighbor. What greater love than one man lay down his life for his brother? What greater love is there than to reach out and lend that helping hand and really be the hands of Christ? I just want to say thank you so much. And you are in our prayers. I'm excited to, continue to share these stories out there, and let people know, like you just said, this is far from over. And just because we may not see it on the ticker or on the news or the websites, this is still a very real situation happening. So
there may be time that it will be also possible for groups to come over and help with rebuilding, with things like that. I don't think it's the time yet. It's still too dangerous.
Right.
But that's just one of the things that may happen in the future, that we could be also involved in helping this way.
Well, definitely keep us posted, because I would love to make people aware of that once the time is right, of course, because as you said, if you go over too early, you just kind of get caught up in all of the people trying to help and do good. But when obviously you're right, there's going to be a time of rebuilding and regrowth, rebirth of a nation. So, Pastor, thank you so much. Sean here. Thank you so much for listening to today's podcast. If you enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like, a follow, and a share. And if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, consider giving it 5 stars. I look forward to sharing the next story with you real soon.